Hello there, and welcome to Forgotten Worlds. My name is Thomas, and tonight I'd like to invite you into a question that drifts at the edge of science and memory, a question that feels both intimate and vast. What if the memories you carry, the faces, the moments, the echoes of your own past were not entirely your own? What if memory itself is not a private possession, but a current running through the universe, passing through us like wind through trees? It may sound impossible. Memory as we know it lives in neurons and synapses, fragile chemical traces that fade with time. And yet, across cultures, myths, and even modern science, there lingers the suggestion that what we remember is part of something greater. That stories, images, and instincts are shared across generations, not only through blood or words, but through a deeper archive woven into nature itself. This is not a debate, but an exploration, not a conclusion, but an invitation to wonder. Could the universe itself hold memory etched into stone, water, and starlight, and could we, in quiet moments, be remembering not only our own lives, but lives far older than ours? So, settle in. Let the pace of the day soften. Imagine yourself drifting in a wide, star-filled night where thoughts stretch across centuries and recollections blur into something larger. Tonight, we'll walk together through the vastness of time and ask, are our memories truly our own, or do they belong to the earth, to the cosmos, to the endless story unfolding all around us? And before we can begin, we need to understand the scale of that story, the deep, unbroken span of time itself. When we speak of time, we often mean hours, days, maybe years. A human life, if we're fortunate, spans close to a century. A civilization, with its monuments and languages, might stretch across a few thousand years before fading into dust. And yet Earth itself is not counted in centuries or millennia, but in billions. 4.5 billion years, give or take. A span so wide it dwarfs every name you've ever heard, every story you've ever read, every trace of history you were taught in school. To compare, consider our species, Homo sapiens. We've been here, in our modern form, for roughly 300 years. It sounds impressive until you set it against the planet's timeline. If Earth's entire history were compressed into a single calendar year, our species would appear sometime on December 31st, in the final few minutes before midnight. All of recorded human history, agriculture, cities, writing, philosophy, empires would take place in the last few seconds of that year. Everything we know, everything we remember, flickers like a spark at the end of an immense fire. Think about that for a moment. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast canyon. At your feet is a thin layer of dust, barely perceptible. That dust is us. Behind it are walls of rock stretching miles high, each layer representing hundreds of millions of years, each stratum a library written not in words but in stone. Most of it unread, most of it erased, and yet it is there, silent, towering, undeniable. What does it mean, then, to measure ourselves against such a backdrop? Civilizations like ours, fragile as paper in the rain, seem impossibly brief. And in that brevity lies an unsettling possibility. If time is so deep, so unbroken, why assume we are the first to rise and ask these questions? Consider this. In 4.5 billion years, there has been room for countless experiments. Life has not been a straight line but a spiral, coiling, collapsing, reforming. Entire kingdoms of creatures have flourished and vanished long before mammals appeared. Trilobites ruled the seas for nearly 300 million years, longer than dinosaurs, longer than us. And dinosaurs themselves thrived for 165 million years. By comparison, human beings are newborns, our footprints still wet on the sand. What if, somewhere in that unreachable span, intelligence had already bloomed and faded? What if consciousness, society, even technology had arisen in forms unfamiliar to us, forms erased by the slow grind of geology? The mind strains to picture it. Perhaps beings with scales instead of skin, or tentacles instead of hands. Perhaps cultures that spoke not with words, but with colors or electrical pulses. Perhaps technologies not made of stone or steel, but of living tissue, ephemeral as mist. It's tempting to think we would know if such civilizations had existed, but the Earth is not a careful archivist. It is more like a restless painter, always layering new strokes over the old. Mountains rise and crumble, oceans swallow coastlines. Forests become coal, shells become limestone, bones dissolve into silt. Fossilization itself is a rare gift, dependent on extraordinary luck, quick burial, perfect conditions, survival through erosion. For every fossil in a museum, billions of lives left no trace. Now stretch that problem across tens of millions of years. Imagine cities swallowed by seas, their metal corroded, their glass shattered, their foundations ground to powder. Imagine tools, books, machines reduced to nothing more than mineral traces dispersed in stone. After a few 100,000 years, evidence is already faint. After a few million, it is gone. And after tens of millions eras measured not by centuries but by shifting continents, the record is nearly blank. This is the haunting truth of deep time. It forgets. It forgets almost everything, which means that what it remembers may not be the whole story. Perhaps you feel a slight shiver at that thought. It is the shiver of standing on a stage long after the actors have left, wondering how many plays were performed before the current one began. The scenery has been repainted. The lights are new. The audience believes it is opening night. But what if it isn't? Scientists themselves have quietly asked versions of this question. In geology and planetary science, there exists something known as the Silurian hypothesis. It asks, if there had been an advanced civilization millions of years before humans, would we be able to detect it? The unsettling answer is, probably not. We might find subtle anomalies in carbon isotopes, odd chemical traces, unusual sediment layers, but even those could be explained away as natural. The record of Earth is both immense and unreliable, a palimpsest written and erased countless times. So, when we measure our 300 years against the Earth's 4.5 billion, the comparison does not reassure us. Instead, it opens a door to wonder, because if civilizations like ours can vanish without leaving much behind, then perhaps we are not unique. Perhaps there were others, uncountable, others scattered like sparks throughout deep time. Imagine for a moment that intelligence itself is not rare but cyclical, that Earth is not hosting its first thinkers but its latest. That memory, in the deepest sense, belongs not to individuals or species but to the planet itself, carried forward in fragments, resurfacing as myth, intuition, or déjà vu. Maybe that is why we tell stories of forgotten ages, of gods who came before, of worlds drowned beneath the sea. Maybe that is why dreams sometimes feel older than ourselves. Perhaps they are. Deep time humbles us, but it also enlarges us. It suggests that we are participants in a drama much older and stranger than we can easily imagine. And it leaves us with a question that lingers like an echo. If others have walked here before, what shadows of their memory still walk with us? The Earth is not a gentle keeper of memory. It is not a library with shelves carefully stacked and catalogued. It is more like an ocean tide, always moving, always reshaping, carrying fragments of the past only to scatter them, dissolve them, and begin again. To understand why so much of history, whether human or pre-human, vanishes, we need to look beneath our feet, into the restless mechanics of the planet itself. The crust we walk on feels solid, permanent, yet it is anything but. Earth's surface is broken into plates that drift, collide, and sink into the mantle over spans of millions of years. This process, known as subduction, is one of geology's most efficient erasers. Entire landscapes, once filled with forests, rivers, even cities, can eventually be swallowed, dragged downward into molten rock, and recycled into new crust. Imagine the streets you know, the buildings around you, the signs and sounds of your life all pulled slowly, invisibly downward, until nothing remained but transformed minerals rising again in the ridges of some far-off ocean. This recycling is why the oldest seafloor we have is only about 200 million years old. By geological standards, that is a blink. Anything older has already been consumed, remelted, written over. The continents preserve more, but even there, erosion scrapes, rivers grind, winds scour, glaciers plow, and mountains collapse. Rock itself is not eternal. It is ground to sand, lifted into peaks, broken into dust, and with it, the stories it once held are erased. Now layer onto this the rarity of fossilization. Life is abundant, but the conditions required to leave a fossil behind are extraordinary. A body must be buried quickly, shielded from scavengers, protected from decay, and infused with minerals before it disappears. Out of the countless trillions of creatures that have lived, only a tiny fraction have ever been preserved. For every fossil we discover, there are countless species, countless individuals whose existence dissolved without a trace. Consider even our own brief history. Most humans who ever lived have left nothing behind. No bones in museums, no names on stone, no artifacts in the soil. A life lived, loved and lost and then gone, as if it had never been. Extend that invisibility across millions of years, and you begin to see the scale of absence. The fossil record is not a book, but a scattering of torn pages, most of the text lost forever. Now imagine a civilization, one not human, one perhaps millions of years before us. Even if it rose to complexity, built structures, crafted tools, and shaped its world, how much of it would survive? Buildings crumble in decades, metal corrodes in centuries, plastics degrade in thousands of years. 1,000,000 years later, almost nothing would remain. 10 million years, and even the traces would be gone, erased by tectonics, buried by sediment, washed away by oceans. 50 million, and it would be as though it had never existed. And yet, in that absence, there lingers the possibility. Because erasure is not evidence of nothingness, it is simply the nature of this planet. We mistake silence for emptiness, but often it is the silence of a story that has been rewritten too many times. Think about the oldest ruins we know, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, nearly 12,000 years old. That alone feels impossibly ancient, older than agriculture, older than the pyramids. And yet, in the measure of geology, it is the briefest whisper, just 12,000 years, a thin scratch on the surface of time. If those stones feel remote, what of a structure 100 million years old? Could it survive? Almost certainly not. It would be gone, erased by wind, rain, subduction, and time. Even the traces of our present civilization are fragile. Leave a modern city untended for a few centuries, and nature reclaims it. Plants pry apart concrete. Water seeps into steel. Entire neighborhoods can vanish beneath forests, deserts, or floods. Archaeologists already struggle to locate traces of towns a few thousand years gone. Extend the timescale, and our monuments are dust. Our satellites fall, burn, and dissolve. Even the great wonders, the pyramids, the Great Wall, will not last forever. So when we say we have found no evidence of pre-human civilizations, we must also admit the Earth is skilled at forgetting, skilled at sweeping away the footprints of those who came before. And here lies the unsettling thought: if another intelligent species had walked the Earth in some forgotten age, would we ever know? Or would their existence be lost, not because it never happened, but because our planet does not keep diaries? It keeps only fragments, scattered in stone, waiting for us to read them if they have not been erased already. Speculation flows naturally from this. Perhaps myths of gods and ancient rulers are faint echoes of memories too deep for our own histories to record. Perhaps instincts, dreams, or inexplicable archetypes are the last whispers of civilizations erased by geology's hand. Not proof, but hints, shadows of memories that may not belong to us alone. The erasure of history is both a warning and a mystery. A warning because it reminds us that our own civilization, no matter how advanced, is just as vulnerable. A mystery because it invites us to wonder how much has already been lost. And as we move forward, we begin to ask, if so much can vanish, then perhaps what survives the fossils, the myths, the anomalies are not just remnants of chance, but fragments of something larger, threads of memory woven into the earth itself. When we picture the age of the dinosaurs, most of us imagine teeth and claws, thunderous footsteps shaking the ground, and reptilian giants locked in endless struggles for survival. Yet behind those familiar images lies a deeper and far stranger possibility. For 165 million years longer than mammals have existed, longer than primates have dreamt beneath starlit skies, the dinosaurs reigned over the earth. A reign not measured in centuries or even millennia, but in spans of time so vast our own history looks like a breath in winter air. Could it be that within that unimaginable stretch of time, intelligence itself had another chance to bloom? Among the many species that walked, swam, and soared during this era, one stands out: Troodon, a small, bird-like dinosaur, perhaps no taller than your waist, with grasping hands, keen senses, and a brain disproportionately large for its body. Paleontologists have often paused when looking at Troodon's skull, its cranial cavity unusually spacious compared to most reptiles. In raw ratios, its brain-to-body size was not unlike that of modern birds, even approaching the scale of early primates. This sparked what is sometimes called the dinosauroid hypothesis. In the 1980s, a Canadian paleontologist named Dale Russell asked a haunting question: what if Troodon had not vanished in the Great Extinction 66 million years ago? What if it had continued evolving along the path of greater intelligence? He even commissioned an artist's reconstruction of this hypothetical future being: upright, bipedal, with forward-facing eyes, dexterous hands, and a skull suggestive of high cognition. A reptilian humanoid not unlike the serpent gods whispered of in myth. Now, the scientific community is careful here. The dinosauroid model was more thought experiment than prediction, an exploration of evolutionary possibilities rather than a claim. Still, the image lingers. A reminder that intelligence is not an inevitable human trait, but a potential outcome that could, in theory, arise more than once. Think for a moment about the length of dinosaur rule, 165 million years. Compare that to us, 300,000 years as Homo sapiens, perhaps 10,000 of recorded civilization. If we were to draw this timeline as a ribbon, dinosaurs would command a span 50 times longer than the entire human experiment. Is it so implausible that, somewhere in that breadth of time, cognition could have reached levels beyond hunting and survival? Perhaps not in skyscrapers or satellites, but in ways we can hardly imagine: social learning, tool use, problem-solving, even protocultures lost entirely to extinction. Imagine, if you will, a late Cretaceous forest. Ferns and cycads crowd the undergrowth. The air is warm and thick with the scent of resin. Beneath the canopy moves a Troodon, eyes bright, talons precise, scanning not only for prey but for opportunity. In its mind flickers the capacity for memory, for planning, for learning from the actions of others. Does it fashion tools from bone or wood? Does it pass hunting techniques from parent to offspring, a culture not written but enacted? We cannot know. But the silence of the fossil record does not forbid it. It only withholds the details. And this brings us to the tantalizing question: what counts as civilization? We often imagine cities, metals, written words, technologies that alter landscapes, but those are our markers, our definitions. A different intelligence might not leave stone monuments or smelted alloys. It might live in harmony with forests, its tools perishable, its knowledge oral and ephemeral. After a few million years, nothing would remain. Even if it reached astonishing heights, geology would wipe its canvas clean. So when we ask, could dinosaurs have evolved intelligence, we are really asking two things. First, could evolution select for higher cognition in a reptilian lineage? Second, if it did, would we ever recognize the traces? On the first point, nature already hints at the answer. Birds, the living descendants of dinosaurs, display remarkable intelligence today. Crows solve puzzles with logic rivaling apes. Parrots remember words for decades. Pigeons navigate across continents using magnetic fields. If such capacities exist in avian survivors, might their dinosaurian ancestors have walked similar paths? Perhaps they began to. Perhaps they never had the time to reach further before fate intervened. On the second point, the fossil record is silent. No chisels, no carved stones, no layered settlements. But remember, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The earth does not preserve all that passes. A culture rooted in perishable materials would vanish like leaves in the wind, and over 66 million years, even more durable artifacts would erode, subduct, or dissolve. And so we return to speculation. What if, long before us, creatures with scales and bright eyes looked at the stars and wondered? What if memory, story, and meaning belonged to them once, carried in forms we no longer know? Could myths of serpent rulers, reptilian gods, and scaled teachers be fragments of a memory not our own, but the planet's? Could those legends be the universe whispering back to us across erased millennia? Perhaps, perhaps not. But the question itself expands our horizon. It reminds us that intelligence is not a singular achievement but a possibility threaded through the fabric of life. And if it has blossomed once before in reptilian minds, then perhaps our own place in history is not unique, but shared. Across the world, in stories whispered by firelight, carved into stone, and preserved in the chants of elders, there runs a curious thread. A thread of scales, of serpents, of reptilian beings who arrive not as simple animals, but as rulers, teachers, gods. From the lush valleys of Mesoamerica to the fertile crescent of Mesopotamia, from the ancient Nile to the islands of the Pacific, cultures separated by oceans and millennia all tell of serpent figures, some wise, some terrifying, but nearly always powerful. In Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki are described as beings who descended from the heavens, their forms sometimes likened to those of scaled or dragon-like creatures. In Egypt, the primordial serpent Apep embodied chaos, locked in eternal battle with Ra, the sun god. In Mesoamerican myth, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, was not a destroyer, but a giver of knowledge, a bringer of order, a guide for humankind. In Hindu tradition, the Nagas dwell in hidden realms beneath rivers and oceans, part divine and part serpent, guarding treasures of wisdom. In China, dragons were revered not as monsters, but as symbols of power, reign, and imperial authority. How curious that in so many places the image of a serpent or reptilian being emerges not as a mere animal, but as something higher, something that instructs, commands, or shapes the destiny of humans. Now, myths are not fossils, they are not stone tablets buried in the earth. They are living, breathing stories, shifting with every retelling. But sometimes, patterns within them feel too consistent to dismiss as coincidence. Why serpents? Why, across so many lands, in so many forms, does the image of the scaled ruler persist? Perhaps the answer lies in psychology. Serpents are both fascinating and frightening to us. Their silent movements, their unblinking eyes, their sudden strikes, these stir instincts buried deep in mammalian brains. Myths may exaggerate those fears, transforming natural dangers into cosmic archetypes. That is one explanation. But what if there is another? What if myths are not simply inventions of fear, but fragments of memory, echoes of something older, something experienced by distant ancestors long before written history. If intelligence once belonged to reptilian minds, might humanity's myths carry faint whispers of their existence, not as literal records, but as cultural memory refracted through time? Imagine, for a moment, a people encountering beings who were not human, yet not mere animals. Scaled figures who possessed knowledge, who wielded tools or powers beyond comprehension. How would those encounters survive across generations? Without writing, they would live in stories. Without artifacts, they would endure as archetypes. Over millennia, those stories might warp, but the essence would remain. Serpents who rule, who teach, who threaten, who bless. Some scholars speak of archetypes as patterns rooted in the human mind. But what if archetypes are not just psychological? What if they are inherited memories, carried not only in our DNA but in the cultural echo of a planet that has seen other rulers before? If Earth itself has memory, as some suggest, then myths might be one of its languages, passed through us unknowingly. Think about the serpent in the Garden of Eden, not just a tempter but a bringer of knowledge, sparking awareness, awakening the human mind. Think of Kukulkan, the Mayan feathered serpent, whose temples were aligned with the heavens. Think of the rainbow serpent of Aboriginal Australia, creator and destroyer, tied to rivers and cycles of life. All serpents, all tied to beginnings, endings, wisdom, or chaos, all strangely persistent across cultures that never touched. What if this is not coincidence? What if buried beneath the surface of our shared myths lies a memory we did not live, but inherited, a memory of reptilian intelligences that may have ruled long before us? Of course, science has no fossil of a serpent god, no ruins of a reptilian city, no tools etched with scaled hands. And yet, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. What survives in myth may be more resilient than stone. A story can outlast empires. An image can leap oceans. A symbol can carry through time even when artifacts have crumbled. Picture yourself listening to such a myth long ago. The fire crackles, the night air is cool, and an elder speaks of a serpent who carved rivers, who brought rain, who taught humans how to sow and harvest. You listen not only with ears, but with something deeper, a recognition you cannot place, as if the story is not new but remembered. As if the image of scales and eyes carries a familiarity that transcends your own life. Could that be the universe remembering through you? Could myth itself be a vessel for planetary memory? Perhaps these serpent beings are not mere invention, but fragments of something once real, intelligences erased by extinction, yet preserved in the only archive that survives deep time, the human imagination. And if that is true, then every serpent carved in stone, every dragon painted on silk, every tale of reptilian gods might be more than art. They might be the last whispers of rulers erased by geology but remembered by story. Not proof, but possibility. Not certainty, but wonder. If serpents ruled the land in memory and myth, then perhaps the oceans held rulers of their own creatures, stranger, quieter, and no less extraordinary. To enter their world, we must dive beneath the waves into a realm that has covered most of Earth for most of its history. A realm where survival is not measured by bricks or fire, but by adaptation, intelligence, and camouflage. And here, among the shifting currents and the forests of coral, one lineage has stood out as if shaped by a different logic altogether: the cephalopods. Octopuses, squids, cuttlefish creatures with arms that seem to think, skin that can change color and texture in an instant, eyes that look eerily like our own. Their intelligence is not hypothetical. It is measured in puzzles solved, mazes navigated, jars unscrewed, and even aquariums escaped under cover of night. An octopus can mimic the movements of other animals, play tricks on predators, and recognize individual humans who feed or bother it. Their curiosity seems personal, even mischievous. Scientists often describe their intelligence as alien, not because they come from beyond Earth, but because their minds evolved along a path utterly separate from our own. Mammals share a common ancestry, a neurological blueprint. Cephalopods diverged hundreds of millions of years earlier, and yet, somehow, intelligence bloomed again in their lineage, shaped by entirely different bodies and senses. Imagine consciousness expressed through 8 arms, each capable of independent movement, each lined with suckers that taste as well as touch. Imagine a brain not centralized like ours, but distributed 3/5 of their neurons in their arms, thinking in parallel, perhaps even dreaming in parallel. If intelligence could arise twice on Earth, once in primates, once in cephalopods, then it is not inevitable, but certainly possible. And that possibility opens a question that drifts like a current. If octopuses and their kin show such brilliance today, what might their ancestors have achieved in the deep corridors of prehistory? For cephalopods are not new arrivals. They are among Earth's oldest dynasties. Long before mammals, before reptiles, before even trees rooted into soil, cephalopods dominated the oceans. Their ancestors, the ammonites and belemnites, thrived for hundreds of millions of years, their spiral shells filling seabeds like stars scattered across the night sky. At their height, they were everywhere in shallow seas, in deep oceans, in waters that washed against continents now lost. They survived multiple mass extinctions, adapted, flourished, and vanished, only for new forms to rise again. Think about that. While our lineage was still scurrying as small nocturnal mammals in the shadows of dinosaurs, cephalopods had already spent eons mastering the seas. Their reign was not brief, but enduring, measured in spans that make human history vanish to nothing. If time allows intelligence to bloom, then they had more than enough. Could they, then, have built something we no longer see? Not cities of stone or fire, but perhaps societies of a different kind, fluid, shifting, ephemeral. A civilization not built above ground, but beneath waves. A civilization that left no pyramids, no bronze tools, no ceramics to be preserved in deserts. Instead, perhaps they built with their bodies, with ink and light, with gestures of skin and movement. A language of color pulses shared across reefs and currents. A knowledge passed through generations without a single mark etched in stone. What would such a society look like to us? Perhaps we would not even recognize it. We look for ruins, but what if the ruins dissolved into seawater millions of years ago? We look for fossils, but soft bodies rarely fossilize, and oceans shift endlessly, burying and erasing. Civilization, as we define it, may simply not apply. And yet, intelligence might still have thrived briefly, or for millions of years before being swept away by extinction. Consider, too, the ocean's vastness. More than 70% of Earth remains underwater, and most of it unexplored. The deep sea hides mountain ranges larger than the Himalayas, trenches deeper than Everest is tall, ecosystems glowing in bioluminescent displays we have only glimpsed with cameras. In those depths, our knowledge is a whisper, not a map. If we struggle to understand living cephalopods today, how could we hope to trace those who may have ruled the seas millions of years ago? And yet, fragments of memory may linger. Myths of sea gods and tentacled monsters appear in every culture. From the kraken of Norse sailors to the Hindu Naga who dwell beneath rivers, from Cthulhu imagined in modern tales to Polynesian stories of Tangaroa, god of the sea, humanity has long dreamt of ocean intelligences vast and alien. Some say these are just projections of fear. The sea is dangerous, so we fill it with monsters. But perhaps these myths are also echoes, faint cultural memories of a truth long buried, that once, beneath the waves, minds older than ours gazed outward with curiosity and purpose. Picture for a moment an ancient ammonite drifting through Paleozoic seas. Its spiral shell gleams in filtered sunlight, while inside, a mind navigates currents, hunts prey, and avoids predators. Multiply that by millions, by species upon species, by ages upon ages. Intelligence may not have appeared in a single spark, but spread like bioluminescence, scattered, shimmering, fading, then flaring again. And if even a fraction of that intelligence organized, communicated, remembered, then perhaps, once upon a time, there were civilizations in the sea. Civilizations we will never know, their histories washed away, not in fire, but in saltwater silence. Perhaps that is why octopuses feel so uncanny to us today. When one gazes at you through glass, eyes unblinking, arms curled in slow thought, it feels less like meeting an animal than like meeting a peer. A mind not ours, but alongside ours, ancient and strange. Could it be recognition, deep in the marrow of memory? Could it be that we sense, without proof, that intelligence once lived in the oceans before it ever walked on land? The ocean is Earth's oldest kingdom, and still its least understood. More than 70% of our planet lies beneath waves, yet vast regions remain unmapped, unseen, and silent in their mystery. We send probes to other worlds, map the surfaces of moons and asteroids, and yet, here at home, the deep sea remains an alien frontier. In those uncharted depths, mountains rise higher than the Alps, valleys sink deeper than Everest, and creatures glow with light conjured from their own bodies. It is a world so strange that even today, every expedition uncovers species never before imagined. If the ocean can still surprise us in the present, what secrets might it conceal from the past? Could whole civilizations, human or otherwise, lie hidden beneath its waves, erased from sight but not from memory? The idea is not as improbable as it might sound. Seas rise and fall with climate, swallowing coastlines and reshaping continents. At the end of the last ice age, when glaciers melted and waters surged, vast tracts of land disappeared beneath rising oceans. Doggerland, once a fertile plain connecting Britain to mainland Europe, now lies beneath the North Sea. Similar drowned landscapes exist off India's coast, in the Mediterranean, in Southeast Asia. Beneath the shallow waves of Yonaguni near Japan, strange formations hint at sunken steps and terraces. Some say they are natural, others whisper of forgotten builders. If these submerged places are so recent, mere thousands of years, what of deeper time? Over millions of years, entire continents have shifted, collided, and sunk. Land masses we no longer remember may have risen above sea level, only to vanish beneath it. If intelligence arose there, if cities flourished, the ocean could have claimed them long ago, scattering their remains into silt. Myth seems to remember what geology forgets. Atlantis, first described by Plato, has become a symbol of the lost city swallowed by the sea. Whether allegory or memory, the image persists. A civilization advanced, yet undone, its remnants hidden beneath the waves. In Hindu traditions, there is talk of Dwarka, a radiant city of the god Krishna, said to have sunk beneath the waters, its ruins perhaps glimpsed off the coast of Gujarat. In Tamil lore, Lemuria was a vast southern land lost to the ocean, a cradle of culture now erased. Polynesian stories tell of Hawaii, ancestral islands beneath the sea. Even in the far north, Norse legends speak of drowned realms swallowed by shifting waters. Why does this motif return again and again across cultures that never touched? Perhaps rising seas and tsunamis etched themselves so deeply into collective memory that they became universal stories. Or perhaps they hint at something older still, a shared echo of civilizations that really did vanish beneath the sea, too long ago for archaeology to confirm. The ocean is a perfect eraser. Salt water corrodes metal, currents scatter stone, and sediment buries all beneath endless shifting layers. Even our modern cities, if submerged, would vanish in millennia. Skyscrapers would collapse, steel would rust, plastics would fragment, and coral would creep over ruins until they blended into reefs. After 10 million years, there would be no trace. After 100 million, not even a whisper, And yet, myths may hold whispers where stone cannot. Atlantis, Lemuria, undersea kingdoms, these names live on not because we have found proof, but because the human imagination keeps circling back to them, as though tugged by a current we cannot resist. It may be that we are remembering something our planet has forgotten. Imagine for a moment walking through such a civilization. Streets of coral architecture, lit not by fire but by bioluminescent gardens. Voices carried not by air but by song-like vibrations in water. Tools shaped from shell, pearl and bone, dissolving back into the sea as if they were never there. A culture invisible to geology, yet alive in myth. Could such things have existed, their memory carried forward only as stories of lost realms and drowned gods? We cannot say for certain, but the thought itself expands our imagination of what civilization might mean. Not all cultures need leave monuments of stone. Not all intelligence must carve its memory into mountains. Some may pass like waves, fluid, elusive, impossible to hold, and yet no less real. And so, when you hear the myths of Atlantis, of Lemuria, of undersea kingdoms where gods once ruled, perhaps you are listening to more than fantasy. Perhaps you are hearing the ocean's voice, speaking through human story. A reminder that the sea does not only erase, it also remembers, in its own way, through us. Sometimes the most unsettling questions are not whispered by poets or mythmakers, but asked by scientists themselves. In 2018, two NASA researchers, Gavin Schmidt and Adam Frank, posed a thought experiment that rippled quietly through both the scientific community and the imagination of those who heard it. They called it the Silurian hypothesis, borrowing the name from a race of intelligent reptiles in an old science fiction series. The question at its heart was simple, but profound. If there had been an industrial civilization on Earth before humans, would we even know? It seems, at first, like an absurd suggestion. Surely a civilization leaves ruins, tools, monuments. Surely we would have noticed. But geology is an efficient eraser, and time is merciless. Over millions of years, landscapes are recycled, oceans rise and fall, continents drift and collide. What is land becomes seafloor, what is mountain becomes rubble, what is artifact becomes dust. After a few 100,000 years, most human structures would be gone. After a few million, even the strongest traces would be faint. After 10 million, almost nothing recognizable would remain. So Schmidt and Frank asked, what kinds of traces might endure? If we were to look for evidence of an ancient industrial civilization, not human, not ours, what signs would geology preserve? The answer, they suggested, lies not in cities or machines, but in chemistry. Industrial activity leaves fingerprints in the very composition of the planet. The burning of fossil fuels, for instance, alters the balance of carbon isotopes in the atmosphere. The release of plastics leaves microparticles that settle into sediments. Agriculture changes nitrogen levels in soils. Mining rearranges the distribution of metals. Even if buildings and artifacts vanish, these subtle shifts might remain anomalies in rock layers, chemical signatures that stand out against the background of natural processes. When we look back through Earth's history, we do find anomalies, layers of rock rich in iridium, hinting at asteroid impacts. Sudden shifts in carbon, marking mass extinctions, periods where oxygen plummeted or surged, where temperatures spiked or collapsed. Most of these have natural explanations: volcanism, impacts, slow cycles of climate, but some patterns remain curious. At intervals, carbon signatures shift in ways not fully understood. Warming events appear abruptly, then fade. Methane spikes echo across the record like faint, half-forgotten alarms. Could some of these be traces of something more, not proof, but possibility? That is the haunting suggestion of the Silurian hypothesis. That buried deep in stone, hidden among the archives of Earth itself, there may be subtle records of civilizations that rose and fell long before us. Not fossils of their bodies or ruins of their cities, but chemical ghosts of their passing. Think of it this way. If alien scientists arrived on Earth 10 million years after our disappearance, would they find New York, Beijing, Cairo? No. They would find a thin layer in the rocks, enriched with plastics, unusual isotopes, scattered residues of combustion. They might puzzle over the sudden surge of carbon dioxide, the rearrangement of sediments, the strange chemistry of that brief window in time. They might speculate, was this the fingerprint of a civilization, or merely an unusual natural event? And so, when we look at ancient anomalies in Earth's record, we face the same puzzle. Are these signs of unusual but natural shifts? Or could they be the faintest memories of civilizations erased? The Silurian hypothesis does not claim an answer, it invites the question. It reminds us that absence of ruins is not absence of possibility, that the deepest traces may not be visible to the eye, but to the chemistry of stone. Imagine for a moment standing in a laboratory where a geologist examines a rock core drilled from deep beneath the Antarctic ice. Within the thin lines of layered sediment lies a sudden spike of carbon, a shift out of place with the slow rhythms of Earth. The scientist notes it, files it, explains it as volcanism or methane release. But what if, quietly, it is more? What if that thin line is the last record of a civilization lost not only to time, but to memory? The unsettling beauty of the Silurian hypothesis is that it humbles us. It suggests that even science, with its precision and rigor, is not immune to forgetting. That the planet itself may keep secrets, written in languages we do not yet know how to read. So when we ask whether civilizations have ruled before us, the question is not just myth or speculation, it is science. Science asking itself what it means to know, what it means to forget, and what it means to be a species that leaves traces in the stone of time. Perhaps we are not the first, perhaps we are only the latest, and perhaps the rocks already know. When we think of history, we imagine scrolls, libraries, carved inscriptions. But Earth does not write in ink or parchment. Its archive is stone. Every layer of rock is a page, every stratum a chapter written slowly by wind, water, and time. To read those pages is to step into deep time itself, to hold in your hand a fragment of memory billions of years old. But like all archives, this one is incomplete. Its words faded, its meanings open to interpretation. Geologists call this the stratigraphic record, the stacked layers of sediment and stone that preserve hints of the planet's past. Within these layers lie fossils, chemical traces, and anomalies that sometimes fit neatly into our models of natural history, and sometimes do not. These outliers are often explained away as quirks of geology, products of volcanism, impacts, or rare chemical shifts. Yet a quiet question lingers. Are we always right to assume they are natural? Or could some of these signals be the erased fingerprints of forgotten intelligences? Consider, for example, the so-called mystery spikes in the geologic record. There are layers rich in rare elements where they should not be. Sudden anomalies in carbon isotopes that suggest a massive, abrupt input of carbon into the atmosphere. Layers of unusual spherules and microscopically melted glass, as if the Earth itself had been scorched by heat far greater than volcanism alone. Officially, these are attributed to asteroid impacts or supervolcanoes. But could they, just possibly, be the industrial scars of a civilization that burned, mined, and built on a scale vast enough to alter the planet itself, only to be erased by time? Then there are fossils that seem out of place, imprints and objects that spark debate. Some have been debunked, others remain unresolved. In coal seams, metallic spheres have been found perfectly shaped, resistant to corrosion, their purpose unknown. In ancient rock, tracks that look eerily like the prints of shoes, though dated to ages before humans. In strata over 100 million years old, a hammer encased in stone. Many dismiss these as hoaxes, coincidences, or misinterpretations. Perhaps they are, but perhaps they are also echoes, artifacts that slipped through the sieve of time, fragments of stories we have chosen not to hear. And what of the chemical signatures that bear uncanny resemblance to our own age? In the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, around 56 million years ago, the Earth warmed rapidly, carbon levels spiked, oceans acidified. It looks in some ways like a mirror of our present. The standard explanation is volcanism and methane release, but some have wondered what if it was not only nature? What if, long before us, another species altered the atmosphere, leaving behind a record we now interpret as purely geologic? These questions are unsettling, and science tends to lean toward caution. Natural explanations are safer, cleaner, less radical. And yet, the rocks are patient. They whisper possibilities we may not want to hear. That what we call anomalies might be archives. That what we dismiss as coincidence might be memory. Imagine for a moment a future geologist millions of years from now, sifting through the rocks of our time. They would find plastics embedded in sediments, a strange, durable layer of synthetic polymers that no volcano or asteroid could explain. They would see isotope ratios shifted by fossil fuel combustion. They would see metals concentrated unnaturally, scattered across layers. Would they understand? Or would they, too, interpret it as natural? If we can mistake our own signals for natural ones in deep time, then perhaps we have already done so with the past. Perhaps some of the unusual layers, the unexplained fossils, the anomalies dismissed, are not natural accidents but the faintest traces of civilizations erased. Technology ground into sand, industry melted into stone, memory fossilized not as machines but as chemistry. The thought does not demand belief. It only invites humility. That the rocks beneath us may carry stories older than our species, older than our kind of thought, older than even our definitions of what intelligence means. That perhaps the Earth has not only forgotten, but also remembered in ways we have yet to fully understand. And so, when you next see a stone, a fossil, a layered cliffside, imagine it as a library. Imagine that within its silent lines lie not only the records of seas and forests, of volcanoes and impacts, but perhaps the erased and misunderstood traces of civilizations too strange, too distant to recognize. Not proof, but possibility. Not certainty, but wonder. Long before the written word became history, long before archaeologists traced dynasties and kings through broken tablets and weathered inscriptions, there were stories of beginnings, of gods who descended, of beings who shaped the world and taught humanity its first skills. These myths, told and retold across generations, hold a peculiar consistency. The first rulers are often not human. They are described as gods, spirits, or beings from beyond. Yet their roles are strangely practical, giving laws, teaching agriculture, imparting the secrets of architecture, astronomy, and writing. In the fertile plains of Mesopotamia, the Sumerians spoke of the Anunnaki. Their name means those who came down from the heavens, a pantheon of powerful beings who established order among humans. The texts describe them not as vague abstractions, but as figures who built cities, decreed kingship, and shaped the destiny of civilizations. They were not merely divine, they were administrators, lawgivers, architects of culture. In Egypt, there is the concept of Zep Tepi, the first time. It was said to be an age when gods walked among men, when wisdom was handed down directly by divine beings. Thoth, the ibis-headed god, was revered as the inventor of writing, mathematics, and measurement. Osiris was said to have taught agriculture and laws, bringing order to chaos. These were not distant, unreachable gods. They were rulers who once walked the earth, shaping the earliest human institutions. Across the ocean, in Mesoamerica, the myths tell similar tales. The Maya and the Aztecs spoke of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, a god who brought knowledge, who taught the arts of civilization. He was associated with the calendar, astronomy, and the ordering of society. His role was less of a destroyer and more of a guide, lifting humans from ignorance into culture. Again and again, across continents and cultures, we encounter this pattern. Humanity receiving the gift of civilization from beings who were not human themselves. They arrive in myth not as vague creators of worlds, but as rulers, teachers, bearers of knowledge. The question lingers: why? Why do so many of the oldest stories describe the first rulers as something other than human? One explanation is symbolic. Myths may encode the struggles of early humans, transforming natural forces into divine personalities. The rising Nile becomes Osiris, the flood becomes Enki, the serpent becomes Quetzalcoatl. The gods are metaphors, and their teachings reflect the slow discovery of agriculture, writing, and law. But another possibility lingers, more unsettling, more wondrous. What if these stories are not only metaphors but memories? Not memories of our own lives, but fragments of encounters older than human history. If there were intelligences before us, reptilian, oceanic, or otherwise, could echoes of their presence have filtered into the earliest myths? Could humanity's oldest stories be recollections of a time when knowledge was not invented, but inherited? Picture, for a moment, the dawn of human culture. Tribes gathered along river valleys, planting seeds, shaping clay, marking stars in the sky. And among them, whispers that these skills were not theirs alone, but given. That the first kings were not self-made, but appointed by beings beyond human comprehension. Imagine the awe of such encounters, retold across generations until they crystallized into myth. The consistency across cultures is difficult to ignore. The Sumerians with their Anunnaki, the Egyptians with their Zep-Tepi, the Mesoamericans with their feathered serpent. Even in far-off places, echoes emerge. The Polynesian tales of godlike navigators, the Norse myths of Odin bringing the runes, the Hindu stories of devas imparting cosmic lore. All different, yet all carrying the same undertone that the first rulers, the first givers of knowledge, were not human. If we take these myths not as literal records, but as distorted memories, they become part of the larger puzzle. A puzzle that suggests humanity may not be the first to walk this path of civilization, but the latest inheritors of a much older legacy. Perhaps this is why the myths endure. They are not merely tales of wonder, but coded memories of encounters too ancient to prove, too faint to deny. Not fossils in stone, but fossils in story, fragments of memory that may belong not to us, but to the universe itself, carried forward in the only medium that survives unbroken across ages, human imagination. And so, when we listen to the stories of the first rulers, we are listening to more than allegory. We may be hearing the echoes of teachers erased from history but preserved in myth. A reminder that perhaps the gifts of civilization, writing, farming, astronomy were not born in isolation, but bestowed, handed down by hands or minds no longer here. Not certainty, but wonder. Not proof, but possibility. Across the great sweep of human cultures, separated by oceans, mountains, and centuries, we find a curious pattern. The earliest rulers are not always depicted as ordinary men or women elevated to power. Instead, they appear as something more, beings tied to the heavens above or to serpentine forms that coil through myth like rivers through stone. These archetypes, sky kings and serpent lords, emerge in places that had no contact with one another, repeating in shapes too consistent to be ignored. In the highlands of Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, is remembered as a bringer of knowledge and order. Across the world in ancient China, the dragon was not a monster but a ruler, a symbol of imperial authority, a guardian of cosmic harmony. In Egypt, pharaohs were called sons of Ra, sky-born kings who ruled not only as mortals but as incarnations of celestial power. The Sumerian kings traced their legitimacy back to the Anunnaki, who descended from the heavens to establish order. In Hindu lore, serpent beings known as Nagas guarded sacred treasures and were said to dwell in hidden realms beneath rivers and skies alike, straddling two worlds. Why do such parallels exist? Why do so many civilizations cut off from one another by time and geography envision their first rulers as beings of the sky or of serpentine form? One explanation is psychological. The sky is vast, unreachable, filled with stars and storms. It inspires awe and authority. Serpents, with their alien forms and hypnotic movements, stir instinctive fear and fascination. Perhaps early humans, seeking metaphors for power, looked upward to the heavens and downward to the serpent, weaving their rulers into these primal symbols. But what if the consistency hints at something deeper? What if these myths are not only metaphors, but echoes, memories carried forward not from our own experience, but from encounters with intelligences older than us? If civilizations once rose and fell long before human history, might their presence have imprinted itself in myth as kings from the sky, as serpent lords who guided or ruled? Imagine a tribe gathering beneath the stars, long before writing, long before stone temples. They look upward and tell stories of luminous beings descending from the heavens, bearing gifts of fire, law, or farming. Or they remember scaled teachers, neither beast nor human, who guided them in the earliest days. Those encounters, distorted across generations, become archetypes, sky kings, serpent gods, symbols, yes, but perhaps also memories. Consider the similarities between cultures that could not have influenced each other. The Mesoamerican feathered serpent and the Chinese dragon, the Egyptian Ra-born pharaohs and the Sumerian Anunnaki, the Nagas of India and the rainbow serpent of Aboriginal Australia. Each culture envisioned its first rulers as beings of immense, often non-human power, tied either to the heavens or to serpent-like forms. The archetype repeats not as isolated invention, but as a chorus sung across continents. Could this be coincidence? Certainly. Human imagination often converges on similar symbols. But could it also be evidence of something stranger, that humanity inherited myths not merely from imagination, but from distant interactions with intelligences lost to deep time? Even Carl Jung, in his theory of archetypes, acknowledged that certain images appear universally across the human mind. The hero, the mother, the serpent, the sky. He suggested they emerge from a collective unconscious. But what if that collective unconscious is not only psychological? What if it is cultural memory stretched across eons, a whisper of stories not ours but the planet's? Picture a forgotten civilization, reptilian, cephalopodic, or entirely alien to our senses, ruling long before us. Their memory erased in stone but surviving in myth. What would remain of them? Perhaps not fossils or tools, but the impression of their presence etched into our stories, reshaped into archetypes, sky kings who brought law, serpent rulers who guided or threatened, beings too strange to describe except in the language of symbol. And here is the haunting part. Myths outlast civilizations. Empires fall, temples collapse, bones turn to dust, but stories persist. A tale told around a fire 1,000 years ago may echo today in a bedtime story, in a symbol carved on stone, in a motif painted on a temple wall. Myths are the most enduring record we possess, and in them may lie the faintest memories of rulers erased by time. So when we look at these global archetypes, we can read them in two ways. One, as the flowering of human imagination, converging on powerful symbols drawn from nature. Two, as inherited memories, fragments of encounters with intelligences long gone, carried forward in the only medium that survives deep time story. Not proof, but possibility. Not certainty, but wonder. The earth, for all its beauty and generosity, has never promised permanence. Life blooms, civilizations rise, and yet the planet carries within it a rhythm of destruction, a cycle of catastrophes that wipe the slate clean. Extinction is not the exception in Earth's story, it is the rule. At least 5 times in the past half-billion years, life has been reset by events so vast and violent that nearly everything was swept away. The most famous of these is the asteroid impact that ended the reign of the dinosaurs. 66 million years ago, a rock 6 miles wide slammed into what is now the Yucatan Peninsula, releasing energy equal to billions of nuclear weapons. The sky darkened, forests burned, oceans boiled with acid rain, and in a geological instant, 75% of species were gone. The mighty dinosaurs, rulers for over 165 million years, vanished, making way for mammals, and eventually for us. But this was only one chapter. 252 million years ago, the Permian extinction reshaped life even more dramatically. A cascade of volcanic eruptions in Siberia released floods of lava, greenhouse gases, and toxins, suffocating land and sea alike. More than 90% of species perished. Coral reefs vanished, forests collapsed, and for millions of years, Earth was nearly silent, stripped bare. It was the closest the planet has ever come to becoming lifeless. These events remind us of a haunting truth. Intelligence, no matter how advanced, is not immune to catastrophe. An asteroid, a supervolcano, a sudden shift in climate, any of these could end not just species, but civilizations. Imagine for a moment that intelligence had arisen long before us, perhaps among the dinosaurs or in cephalopods, or in some lineage now forgotten. Even if they built, even if they thrived, how would they have survived such resets? A city of stone would shatter under firestorms. A society of oceans would suffocate in acid seas. An entire species could vanish in a single unlucky century, its memory erased not gradually but violently. The earth, in its cycles of creation and destruction, does not play favorites. It wipes the board clean, and in doing so, clears the way for something new. This raises a possibility both sobering and wondrous. What if civilizations have risen and fallen many times, each reset by cataclysm? What if our story is only the latest in a series, each erased by fire, flood, or ash, leaving no trace but whispers in myth? Consider the supervolcano beneath Yellowstone. Today it sleeps, but in the past, eruptions of its scale have blanketed continents in ash, altering climate for centuries. If such an eruption happened tomorrow, our global civilization, dependent on fragile supply chains, delicate ecosystems, and digital infrastructure, could collapse within decades. Within millennia, nature would reclaim our ruins. Within millions of years, there would be almost nothing left. If this is true for us, it must also be true for any who came before. Civilizations, no matter how advanced, may simply not be built to endure cataclysm. They are temporary, fragile, subject to the whims of a planet that has always favored change over permanence. And yet, perhaps fragments survive. Myths of floods, of fire, of destruction and rebirth appear in nearly every culture. The Sumerian tale of Utnapishtim, the biblical story of Noah, the Hindu flood of Manu, the Hopi stories of world renewals, each speaks of destruction followed by guidance, survival, renewal. Could these myths be faint echoes of real cataclysms preserved across ages? Could they also carry fragments of older memories, not only of human survival, but of intelligences erased before us? To imagine this is to see Earth not as a stage for one civilization, but as a theater hosting many plays, each separated by curtains of fire and ash. One performance ends, the set is destroyed, and another begins. Perhaps we are watching the latest act, unaware of the scripts already lost. Not proof, but possibility. Not certainty, but wonder. When the curtain falls on a civilization, not all life ends with it. Even in the darkest catastrophes, survival flickers somewhere, a seed that resists fire, a creature that endures ash, a few who carry forward memory into a new world. And perhaps, in these moments of reset, survivors from older intelligences have walked among the bewildered, fragile beings who came after, appearing not as ordinary figures, but as gods. Across mythologies, there are recurring stories of culture bringers, figures who emerge after disaster to teach, to guide, to restore. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl was remembered not only as a creator, but as one who returned after calamity to re-establish order. In Greek tradition, Prometheus gave fire to humankind after a great flood had reshaped the earth. In Egyptian lore, Osiris reigned in a golden age after chaos, teaching agriculture, law, and the rhythms of life. In Polynesian stories, Maui fished up islands after waters had drowned the land. The pattern is clear. After the world ends, someone returns to guide the beginning. Now, we might see these figures as purely symbolic, the embodiment of resilience, the human imagination insisting that even after disaster, wisdom survives. But what if they are something more? What if, after cataclysm, remnants of older intelligences endured? Not whole civilizations, but fragment survivors who, stumbling into the aftermath, became teachers to those just emerging. Imagine an advanced species undone by catastrophe, their cities gone, their numbers reduced, their technologies ruined, and yet a few survive, carrying with them memory of the old world. When they encounter humans early, vulnerable, searching for guidance, they share fragments of what they know: agriculture, astronomy, architecture, stories of floods and fire. To the humans, they appear not as fellow mortals, but as gods. This speculation is not proof, but it resonates with myth. Because these culture bringers are almost always remembered as more than human, yet less than omnipotent. They teach, but they also suffer. Prometheus is punished. Quetzalcoatl departs. Osiris is slain and resurrected. These are not eternal creators. They are survivors marked by loss. Perhaps what we read as divinity is the memory of their survival knowledge carried across the threshold of disaster into the fragile dawn of a new age. Think of how survivors of our own civilization might be remembered. If our world collapsed tomorrow, our cities drowned, our satellites silenced, our archives erased, and a few humans endured, what would they carry? Perhaps fragments of science, perhaps rituals of technology, perhaps symbols of machines long gone. To their descendants, those fragments would become sacred. Electricity would become lightning stolen from gods. Satellites would become stars that once spoke. A single survivor teaching agriculture could become immortal in story. In this way, myth could be the fossil of survival, not of whole civilizations, but of the last echoes of what came before. It is telling that so many myths describe gods as returning after catastrophe. They arrive not to create the world from nothing, but to restore it, to hand down gifts of knowledge. Why would cultures invent this motif unless they carried faint memories of guidance after calamity? Perhaps those memories were not imagined, but inherited from encounters with survivors of older intelligences whose names we no longer know. This interpretation does not diminish the beauty of myth, it deepens it. It suggests that humanity's earliest stories are not only allegories but archives, carrying fragments of memory through time in a form more resilient than stone. Stone can crumble, metal can rust, but a story, retold, can survive across ages. And so, when we read of Prometheus, of Quetzalcoatl, of Osiris, of Maui, we may be reading more than allegory. We may be listening to the last whispers of civilizations lost, their survivors mistaken for gods, their knowledge reshaped into myth. Not certainty but wonder, not proof but possibility. If myths are the stories that carry memory, then artifacts are the objects that provoke it. Scattered across history, there are discoveries that do not sit comfortably within the timelines we have built. They are called out-of-place artifacts, OO parts for short. Objects that seem too advanced, too anomalous, or too strange to belong where they were found. For some, they are curiosities, easily explained or dismissed. For others, they are tantalizing fragments of a deeper history, clues to civilizations that should not exist, or perhaps to civilizations that no longer do. One of the most famous of these is the crystal skull, found in various parts of Central America and often attributed to pre-Columbian cultures. These carved skulls are made of clear quartz, shaped with uncanny precision. Modern studies suggest that many were crafted in recent centuries, perhaps as forgeries or ceremonial objects. Yet the mystery endures, for the skill required to carve quartz without fracturing it is immense. Whether ancient or not, the skulls embody the haunting possibility of technologies or techniques beyond what we expect of their age. Then there are the maps. The Piri Reis map of 1513, drawn by an Ottoman admiral, includes details of South America long before Europeans had explored its full coastline. More curious still, some claim it shows parts of Antarctica without its ice. If true, this would suggest a knowledge of the continent's hidden shape long before modern surveys. Scholars explain this as the combining of older maps, fragments passed down from earlier sailors. But the question remains, how old were those original sources, who charted coastlines no human should have seen? In coal seams and rock strata, stranger artifacts have been reported. A hammer encased in stone dated to over 100 million years ago. Metallic spheres, perfectly shaped, found in South African mines, their purpose unknown. Impressions that resemble footprints or tools in layers far older than humanity. Many are dismissed as misidentifications or hoaxes, and doubtless some are. Yet even the possibility unsettles. If even one were genuine, what story would it tell? The mainstream view is cautious. Archaeology works within frameworks built from context, dating, and comparative evidence. OO parts often lack such context. They appear isolated, without supporting layers. To most scholars, they are anomalies best explained by error or chance. Yet for those drawn to speculation, the very isolation of these objects makes them compelling. They feel like messages from forgotten ages, fragments too stubborn to erase completely. Imagine holding such an object, a hammer in ancient stone, a sphere from primordial rock. In your hand is something that should not exist, something that violates the neat timelines of history. Your mind strains to explain it. Hoax, coincidence, natural formation. And yet, a whisper remains. What if it is real? What if it is memory made solid? If civilizations once ruled before us, their artifacts would not survive easily. Most would be erased by geology, buried by oceans, dissolved by time, but a few by chance, by miracle might endure. Small, scattered, without context, they would confuse the record. They would appear as OO parts, out of place, out of time. And perhaps that is exactly what we see. It is not necessary to believe that every anomalous artifact is proof of ancient intelligence. Most likely, many are not. But their very existence reminds us that history is less certain than we like to believe, that timelines are interpretations, and that the Earth itself is not a reliable archivist. The fascination with OO parts lies not only in their mystery, but in what they suggest, that human history may be a fragment of a much larger story. A story with missing chapters, erased civilizations, and artifacts that surface like driftwood after a storm. To look at such an object is to feel the weight of deep time, to wonder if we are not the first to hold tools, to chart maps, to carve crystal, to ask whether the memories we call our own are instead borrowed from the universe, from the earth, from intelligences whose names we will never know. Scattered across the world are monuments so vast, so precise, and so enduring that they seem to defy the capacities of the civilizations that supposedly built them. These megalithic sites, carved from stone and aligned with the stars, invite awe not only for their scale, but for their silence. They stand without explanation, without instruction, as if daring us to remember what has been forgotten. Consider the Great Pyramid of Giza. Over 4,000 years old, it rises with a precision unmatched even by modern builders working with far greater tools. Its base is nearly perfectly square, its alignment with true north astonishing in its accuracy. The stones, weighing tons each, were cut and placed with tolerances so fine that even a sheet of paper struggles to slip between them. To us, it is a marvel of human ingenuity, but to some, it is also a question. How did a Bronze Age culture achieve such mastery without iron tools, without wheels for transport, without modern surveying instruments? Then there is Pumapunku in Bolivia, where stone blocks of diorite and andesite, among the hardest rocks known, are cut with geometric precision, edges sharp as if machined. The blocks fit together not with mortar but with interlocking joints, as though part of a puzzle designed by unseen engineers. The site is dated to around 500 CE, yet even today stonemasons struggle to replicate its techniques. In Baalbek, Lebanon, lie some of the largest stones ever quarried by human hands. The stone of the pregnant woman, half buried in the earth, weighs over 1,000 tons. To move such a block with primitive tools seems unimaginable, yet there it rests, part of a complex whose origins stretch into murky antiquity. Stonehenge in England, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, Nan Madol in Micronesia, the list continues. Each site raises questions not only of how, but of why. Why build with such scale, such precision, when simpler methods would suffice? Why align monuments with solstices, equinoxes, and star paths, unless knowledge of the heavens was already profound? Mainstream archaeology offers explanations: clever engineering, communal effort, symbolic devotion, and these explanations may be correct. Yet the sense of mystery endures because the methods are not fully known and the motives are not fully understood. Which brings us to speculation. Could it be that some of these techniques were not wholly human inventions, but inheritances? What if the earliest builders did not create from nothing, but from memory, fragments of knowledge passed down, perhaps from survivors of older intelligences? Imagine the aftermath of a great catastrophe. A small group of survivors different from us, older than us, still carry knowledge of geometry, astronomy, and engineering. They cannot rebuild their world, but they can pass fragments of their wisdom to the humans they encounter. To those early humans, these beings would seem like gods. Their techniques would become sacred, their monuments eternal. Over time, their presence would blur into myth, but their methods would echo in stone. This possibility reframes the megaliths. The pyramids, the stone circles, the temples and terraces, perhaps they are not only the triumphs of human invention, but the echoes of older civilizations passed down like half-remembered dreams. If so, then the precision of the stones is not surprising. It is memory made solid. Consider how knowledge itself behaves. It does not vanish all at once. It lingers in fragments. A child hears a story without context, repeats it to their own children, and a myth survives. A builder learns a technique without its origin, applies it, and a method endures. Across generations, fragments accumulate, reshaped and repurposed, until the origin is lost but the practice remains. Could humanity's first monumental projects be fragments of memory, not invention? Could the true originators of these lost technologies have been non-human rulers erased by time? If so, then megaliths are not only architecture, they are archives. They record not only the presence of ancient peoples, but perhaps the survival of knowledge from before humanity's dawn. They are whispers in stone, carrying techniques too advanced for their time, preserved as sacred acts rather than practical methods. To walk among these monuments is to walk through memory. The stones do not speak, but they remind. They remind us that history may not be a straight line, but a circle, that what we call progress may sometimes be rediscovery, that our greatest works may rest on foundations far older than we realize. Not certainty, but wonder, not proof, but possibility. When we think of archaeology, we imagine spades in the soil, bones unearthed, broken pottery pieced together into a story. But archaeology depends on survival. It depends on chance. What endures is not everything that was, but the smallest fraction, filtered by geology, chemistry, and time. To study the past is to work with fragments, and the farther back we look, the fewer those fragments become. This is the paradox of deep time. It is vast, yet it leaves so little behind. Most of human history, hundreds of thousands of years, has no written record. Entire cultures vanish without leaving more than a scatter of tools, a few hearths, a handful of bones, and that is only across tens of thousands of years. Stretch the scale to millions, and the record thins almost to nothing. Consider what happens to ordinary objects. Wood rots, fabrics unravel, leather decays, even metals corrode. A city of steel and glass, if abandoned, would collapse within centuries. Within millennia, forests would cover it, deserts would grind it, oceans would drown it. Within millions of years it would vanish entirely, its memory dissolved into sediments or subducted into the mantle. Fossils themselves, the very backbone of our understanding of prehistory, are rare miracles. For a creature to fossilize, it must be buried quickly, shielded from decay, mineralized under precise conditions. Out of the countless trillions of living beings that have walked the earth, only a tiny fraction left fossils behind. The fossil record, then, is not a complete story, but a tattered book with most of its pages missing. And what of civilizations? What of machines, tools, structures? The odds of preservation are even slimmer. Archaeology is biased towards stone, ceramics, and bones, the few materials that endure across millennia. If an ancient civilization relied on materials that decayed, its memory would vanish with them. A culture of wood, fiber, and organic compounds could flourish for millions of years and leave almost nothing for us to find. This is why even our own traces are fragile. If humanity were to disappear today, what would remain in 10 million years? Perhaps a faint layer of plastics, fragments of concrete, altered isotopes from nuclear reactions. But our cities, our books, our machines gone. The great monuments might linger briefly, but eventually, even they would crumble into dust. Archaeologists of the distant future might never know we were here. And if that is true for us, how much more true would it be for any civilization that may have come before? Their cities erased, their tools dissolved, their machines unrecognizable. Only the faintest traces, chemical anomalies, odd fossils, unexplained layers in stone might survive, and even those could be mistaken for natural processes. This is the archaeology of absence, the recognition that silence does not mean emptiness, that the lack of evidence is not evidence of lack. The earth is not a perfect archivist. It forgets more than it remembers. And yet, this forgetting is also a kind of wonder. It means the past is larger than what we see. It means that behind the silence, there may be stories untold. Perhaps civilizations bloomed in ages we cannot reach, their memory erased from the crust, but lingering in myths, in anomalies, in the intuition that we are not the first. To walk through this silence is unsettling. It forces us to question our assumptions, to see archaeology not as certainty, but as interpretation. We build histories from fragments, but fragments are not the whole, they are only whispers. So when we look back and see nothing but scattered fossils and broken tools, we must remember, absence is not proof. The earth may have hosted countless civilizations, countless experiments in intelligence, each erased by time. Their memory may not lie in stone, but in the echoes we still feel in myth, in wonder, in the suspicion that history is deeper than we know. Not certainty, but wonder. Not proof, but possibility. If civilizations can vanish so completely, if stone and steel and story alike can be erased by time, then we are left with a sobering question. What would remain? What traces could survive long enough to whisper across millions of years? If archaeologists of the far future, or perhaps other intelligences entirely, were to sift through the record of our age, what would they find? The answer lies not in the monuments we most admire, but in the humble and the overlooked. Plastics, for instance, are among our most enduring creations. They are everywhere, woven into clothing, scattered across oceans, buried in landfills, drifting through air as microfibers. They resist decay, lingering for centuries, perhaps millennia. Over millions of years, they may not remain as bottles or bags, but their chemical ghosts could be pressed into sediments, fossilized as thin layers of polymer residue. To a distant investigator, such a stratum might appear as an anomaly, something artificial, something unlike the slow products of geology. Then there are isotopes. Our nuclear experiments, our reactors, our weapons all leave behind signatures in the balance of elements. Radioactive isotopes that do not occur naturally, or not in such abundance, are scattered into the soil and sea. Over time they decay, but some last long enough to outlive civilizations. If another intelligence were to study the rocks millions of years hence, they might notice the odd ratios, the fingerprints of fission and fusion, and wonder what kind of beings altered the chemistry of the Earth so profoundly. Carbon, too, carries memory. Our burning of fossil fuels is altering the atmosphere, shifting the balance of isotopes in ways that will endure in stone. Millions of years from now, future geologists could detect a sudden spike of carbon dioxide, a rapid warming event recorded in shells, soils, and ice. To them, it would appear as a sharp and unnatural line in the record, distinct from the slow rhythms of volcanic cycles. Perhaps they would puzzle over it, as we puzzle over the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, a mysterious warming 56 million years ago. Perhaps they would ask, was this natural, or was it the trace of a civilization long gone? Odd sediment layers might also remain. Our concrete, our glass, our metals, they may not survive as structures, but they can fragment, disperse, and settle into unique configurations. Already, geologists speak of a new layer forming the Anthropocene, marked by plastics, isotopes, and chemical anomalies. This layer is our signature, our echo pressed into the stone of tomorrow. And it is precisely this kind of layer that we may already be misinterpreting in the past. When we encounter strange spikes of carbon, unusual concentrations of metals, sudden warming events, we explain them as volcanism, impacts, or natural accidents, and perhaps they are. But the Silurian hypothesis reminds us they could also be faint traces of civilizations erased. The Earth's memory is subtle, and our interpretations are shaped by what we expect to find. If we do not expect civilizations in deep time, we will not recognize them. So perhaps we are already looking at their remains, mistaking their traces for natural events. Perhaps in the thin lines of rock, in the chemical signatures we dismiss, in the anomalies we set aside, there are whispers of others who came before. Not in statues or scripts, but in the language of geology, not in proof, but in possibility. It is humbling to realize that our own legacy may follow the same fate. Long after our cities have crumbled, long after our languages are forgotten, our memory may survive only as plastic residues, isotope ratios, and carbon spikes pressed into stone. To those who come after, whether human or not, we may not appear as builders of skyscrapers or dreamers of stories, but as a thin, curious layer in the rocks. A line of difference, a signal of presence, a memory not of who we were, but that we were. And if that is how we will be remembered, then perhaps that is how others were remembered before us. Thin layers, odd anomalies, strange signals in stone. Not certainty, but wonder. Not proof, but possibility. For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors lived in ways not so different from other creatures. They hunted, they gathered, they traveled in small groups across vast landscapes. Their tools were simple, their shelters fragile, their stories unrecorded. And then suddenly, by the measure of deep time, something changed. Around 40 years ago, symbolic thought appeared in full force. Caves in Europe, Africa, and Asia began to glow with paintings of animals, constellations, and human forms. In Chauvet and Lascaux, walls flicker with mammoths and lions, bison and horses, rendered with an artistry that suggests not just survival, but imagination. In Blombos Cave in South Africa, pieces of ochre are etched with deliberate geometric patterns, symbols whose meanings are lost to us but whose intent is clear. Humans were thinking in abstractions, dreaming beyond the immediate. From this point forward, change accelerated. Figurines of ivory and stone emerged, representing humans, animals, and beings in between. Burial sites show evidence of ritual, of care for the dead, of belief in worlds beyond life. Music was born in the form of bone flutes, their hollow tones echoing across millennia. And then, in an astonishingly short span, humans went from scattered bands to builders of monumental sites like Göbekli Tepe. Göbekli Tepe, in modern-day Turkey, is over 11,000 years old, predating agriculture, predating cities, predating the written word. Massive stone pillars stand in circles, carved with animals, symbols, and mysterious forms. It is a site that rewrites our assumptions. Once we believed that farming gave rise to temples, Göbekli Tepe suggests that temples may have come first, that symbolic thought and ritual were the seeds of civilization itself. How did this leap occur so quickly? Evolution is typically gradual, yet the flowering of human culture seems like a sudden blaze. From cave walls to monumental architecture, from flutes to astronomy, the span is short, the transformation immense. Mainstream explanations point to the crossing of a cognitive threshold, the development of language, the expansion of brain connectivity, the tipping point of symbolic thought. And perhaps that is all it was. But speculation lingers. Could we have been helped? Could fragments of knowledge, passed down from elsewhere, have accelerated our rise? Imagine for a moment that earlier intelligences walked this earth, civilizations erased by time, their memory scattered in myth and anomaly. If fragments of their knowledge survived through survivors, through teaching, through inheritance, might humanity's sudden leap be less mysterious? Perhaps what seems like invention was also rediscovery. Perhaps the seeds of writing, farming, astronomy, and architecture were planted long before, carried forward invisibly until they bloomed again in us. Even our earliest myths suggest this possibility. Gods and culture bringers are described not only as creators, but as teachers. Thoth gives writing, Quetzalcoatl teaches calendars, Osiris teaches farming, Prometheus gives fire. These stories across cultures describe not invention but transmission, knowledge given, not discovered. Could they be distorted memories of inheritance, fragments of wisdom passed down from non-human predecessors? Consider how fragile yet powerful knowledge island. A single teaching can transform a species. Fire, agriculture, geometry, the wheel, each is a threshold. Once crossed, there is no return. If an older intelligence handed us even one such threshold, the leap would appear miraculous, sudden, incomprehensible. To us, it looks like evolution on fast forward, but perhaps it is something else, inheritance. This does not mean humanity's creativity is diminished. It means we may be part of a continuum, a lineage of intelligence stretching across forgotten ages. We are not alone in our inventiveness, but heirs to a memory far older than our species. Göbekli Tepe, cave art, bone flutes, burial rituals, these are not just milestones of human imagination. They are thresholds, moments when something beyond survival became possible. Whether sparked by evolution alone or nudged by fragments of older intelligences, they mark the beginning of the story we now call civilization. And in the speed of that story, in its sudden blaze, we hear an echo, that memory may not be ours alone, that what we call human progress may also be the resurfacing of older dreams, older teachings, carried across the silence of deep time until we were ready to receive them. Not certainty, but wonder, not proof, but possibility. If humanity's sudden leap feels like a mystery, then perhaps the oldest myths offer us a clue. Again and again, cultures across the world tell stories not of discovery, but of gifts. The knowledge that makes us human, fire, writing, farming, astronomy, is not portrayed as something we invented, but as something handed down. The bringers of these gifts are remembered not as ordinary mortals, but as beings apart, gods, teachers, tricksters, sometimes punished for their generosity, sometimes worshipped for their wisdom. In Greek myth, there is Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humankind. Fire was more than warmth, it was transformation. It meant cooking, metallurgy, light, protection. To the Greeks, this leap was so immense that it could not be explained as human invention. It had to be a gift, a theft from divine realms, and Prometheus, punished eternally for this act, becomes a symbol not only of rebellion but of inheritance of knowledge passed across a boundary humans could not cross alone. In Egypt, Thoth, the ibis-headed god, is credited with the invention of writing, mathematics, and science. Writing is not portrayed as a gradual human innovation but as a divine creation, gifted to humanity to preserve order and wisdom. Thoth was not just a god, he was a teacher, remembered as the one who carried knowledge across the threshold of myth into civilization. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, taught humans agriculture, calendars, and astronomy. He was not a destroyer but a guide, one who elevated humanity from survival into culture. The Mayans and Aztecs remembered him not only as a god, but as a benefactor, a bringer of civilization itself. These stories echo one another in form and theme. Knowledge comes from beyond. It is given, not discovered. And those who give it are remembered as more than human. Why does this pattern recur? Why do cultures with no contact create myths of inherited wisdom? The mainstream view is symbolic. Fire, writing, farming, these were so transformative that they felt divine. Myths turned human breakthroughs into stories of gods to honor their significance. This is a compelling explanation. And yet, the universality of the motif invites another question. What if these myths preserve memory not of invention, but of transmission? What if these gifts were truly given, not by gods, but by survivors of older intelligences? Imagine a people struggling at the edge of survival, living by instinct and chance. Into their world arrive figures who remember more beings who carry fragments of knowledge from civilizations long erased. They teach fire, not because they invented it, but because they carried its memory. They teach farming, astronomy, writing, because these were once their own tools. To the humans, these figures would be divine. To us, they would be survivors. Over time, memory becomes myth. The survivors vanish, their origins forgotten, but the stories remain. Prometheus giving fire, Thoth gifting writing, Quetzalcoatl teaching agriculture. Each myth a fossil of inheritance, a hand-me-down from an earlier intelligence. Even in cultures far apart, the echoes persist. In Polynesia, Maui is remembered for pulling islands from the sea, a metaphor perhaps for land reclaimed after floods. In Mesopotamia, Oannes, a fish-like being, rose from the waters to teach humans law, literacy, and agriculture. In India, Manu received wisdom from the gods after the Great Flood, guiding humanity's rebirth. These are not isolated tales, they are a chorus. If myths are memory, then perhaps they are also instruction. Perhaps the gifts of civilization were passed to us not once, but many times, each after catastrophe, each from survivors of a world we no longer know. This does not require us to believe in gods or serpents or fishmen. It only asks us to see myth as archive, an archive of memory that survived where stone and metal did not, a record not of invention, but of inheritance. And so, when we read of Prometheus punished, of Thoth recording, of Quetzalcoatl guiding, we may be reading not only allegory but testimony. Testimony that humanity did not walk this path alone, that our sudden leap may have been the result of teachings far older than we can trace, that what we call progress may, in part, be memory resurfaced. Not proof, but possibility, not certainty, but wonder. When we speak of civilization, we tend to imagine reflections of ourselves, cities of stone, machines of metal, tools shaped by hands. Our definition of intelligence is bound to our own path. But what if this is too narrow? What if intelligence has appeared in forms we can hardly recognize, forms that leave no ruins, no monuments, no artifacts we would call technology? Consider energy. Life itself is, at its root, a dance of energy flows: sunlight captured by plants, heat vented from the Earth's core, electricity flickering in the nervous systems of animals. Could there have been intelligences that organized themselves not around physical tools, but around mastery of energy? A civilization of beings who shaped magnetic fields, who communicated through light or resonance, who left no stone structures because their creations were invisible to us. Their legacy might not be ruins in deserts, but anomalies in geology, unexplained alignments of magnetic minerals, or subtle alterations in radiation fields. Or consider biology. Our technology is external. We build tools separate from our bodies. But what if another intelligence chose a different path: internal evolution, instead of external invention? Imagine beings who shaped their own DNA with precision, creating bodies adapted to every environment. A civilization of living machines, biotech organisms that replaced cities and tools with symbiotic ecosystems. Such a society might leave no ruins, because its technologies would decay as quickly as flesh. Its memory would vanish not in fire, but in compost, dissolving back into the soil. The oceans, too, remind us that alternate intelligences may already exist alongside us. Octopuses, dolphins, whales all show remarkable cognition, yet they do not build monuments. Their intelligence is embodied in behavior, in communication, in culture passed through song and gesture. If an aquatic civilization rose to prominence, it might never leave stone carvings or metal tools. Its legacy would be invisible in the fossil record, dissolved in salt water. Civilizations of this kind may have come and gone, their memory erased before we ever learn to look. We also assume that civilizations advance through material accumulation, larger buildings, greater machines, more enduring monuments. But what if intelligence does not always climb that ladder? What if the highest form of civilization is not building more but leaving less? An advanced society might deliberately choose impermanence, valuing harmony with nature over conquest of it. Their presence would be invisible to us not because it was absent, but because it was subtle. They could have thrived for millions of years, leaving behind nothing more than balanced ecosystems and stories carried in myth. This forces us to confront the possibility that our search for earlier civilizations may be misguided. We look for pyramids, metal, and fire. But intelligence might not take those forms. It might live in energy patterns, in biological adaptation, in cultural memory. It might thrive without leaving traces we recognize. And here lies the challenge. Absence of evidence may not only be the result of time's erasure, it may also be the result of our own limited imagination. We expect to find ourselves in the past, but what if the past holds beings we cannot even describe? What if civilizations walked the earth or swam its oceans, or thrived in its skies not in the image of humans, but in ways utterly alien? Speculation like this does not claim proof, it only opens the door to wonder. It asks us to expand our definition of civilization, to see intelligence not as a straight path leading to skyscrapers and satellites, but as a branching tree with many possible forms, most of which leave no ruins we would recognize. Perhaps we are not the first rulers of Earth. Perhaps we are not even the first to wonder. And perhaps if other intelligences have existed, they would look nothing like us, and their civilizations would leave nothing we would call evidence. Not certainty, but wonder. Not proof, but possibility. When we imagine civilizations, we picture walls of stone, towers of metal, and roads etched across the land. We imagine things that last, things that resist weather, fire, and time. But what if intelligence arose in ways that left no monuments? What if entire civilizations existed that were, by their very nature, invisible to us? Think about this. Every artifact we've ever studied, from chipped flint to bronze swords, depends on matter that endures. Stone, metal, ceramics. They linger long enough to be found. But what if an intelligent society built not with stone or metal, but with flesh, with water, with living tissue? What if their tools were grown, not forged, and when they were gone, they melted back into soil and sea, leaving nothing but the faintest chemical shadow? Biotechnology is no longer a dream for us. Even now, we engineer bacteria to create medicines, we grow artificial organs, we dream of living machines. But imagine a civilization that made this their entire path. A world where houses were living shells, where lights glowed from bioluminescent trees, where transportation flowed on the backs of engineered organisms. To us, such a world would leave no pyramids, no statues, no relics. It would vanish as completely as a garden allowed to go to seed. And millions of years later, we would find no trace of it at all. Or consider the possibility of civilizations of information. We tend to think of knowledge as books, tablets, carvings. But what if an intelligence chose to encode memory in ways we would never detect? Pulses of magnetic fields written into the rock, vibrations stored in crystal lattices, chemical codes hidden in the DNA of organisms. Such a civilization might fill the planet with archives we walk across every day, unaware, blind to their language because it is not ours. And then there are societies of energy. Could there have been intelligences that harnessed not matter but fields electrical, gravitational, even quantum? Perhaps they flourished in plasma currents in the sky, in the auroras that once blazed brighter than today. Perhaps they lived in storms, in pulses of lightning that carried complex patterns like neurons firing in a brain the size of the sky. When the climate shifted, when the magnetic field changed, they may have faded like smoke, leaving no mark but an unexplained rhythm in ancient rocks. This is not so strange as it sounds. Even here, even now, intelligence wears many masks. Mycelial networks beneath forests send signals through threads of living matter. Slime molds solve mazes without nerves. Whales carry songs across oceans that shift and evolve like cultural traditions. None of these would leave fossils. None would survive in stone. And yet they are real, thriving forms of thought. So why not imagine civilizations built on such foundations? Civilizations whose art was made of sound, whose architecture was woven of roots, whose monuments were waves in the sea or signals in the air. Civilizations that existed fully, richly, beautifully, and then vanished without leaving a single shard for us to hold. And here lies the quiet danger of our search for the past. We look only for ourselves. We dig for metal, for stone, for fire. We forget that intelligence may not build the way we build. It may not even value permanence. It may have chosen the opposite path, to live lightly, to leave no trace, to be remembered only in the balance it left behind. Perhaps this is why so many myths speak not only of gods, but of spirits, of beings too subtle to be seen yet deeply present. Perhaps invisible civilizations are not gone at all, but continue to whisper through ecosystems, guiding growth, shaping memory. Perhaps the faint ache we feel when we look at stars or oceans is not longing for the unknown, but recognition of companions we cannot perceive. Invisible civilizations remind us of humility. They remind us that not all that is real can be measured, not all that is enduring must be seen. They open the possibility that Earth has carried many forms of intelligence, some grand and visible, others delicate and hidden, all part of the endless story of life. Not proof, but possibility, not certainty, but wonder. If we allow ourselves to imagine that Earth has hosted intelligences before us, then the implications are profound. Humanity would not stand at the beginning of the story, nor at its pinnacle, but somewhere in the middle of a long and repeating cycle. Our civilization would be less a unique miracle than the latest verse in an ancient song, one sung again and again by the planet itself. The idea that others came before us unsettles our sense of importance. We like to believe that our rise was inevitable, that 4.5 billion years of evolution were all leading to us, to skyscrapers, to satellites, to symphonies. But what if we are not the goal, but one experiment among many? What if the Earth has raised up intelligence before, watched it flourish, and then folded it back into silence? This perspective transforms history into something cyclical, not linear. Civilizations rise, burn bright, and vanish. The Earth resets. Millions of years pass, then intelligence blooms again, in a new form, in a new species. Each thinks itself unique, but each is part of the same recurring rhythm, as natural as the tides. If this is true, then humanity belongs to a lineage we cannot see. We are heirs to a tradition not written in books but etched into the very fabric of life. Our myths, our instincts, our unexplained leaps may be echoes of predecessors whose names are lost. Their memory lingers not in artifacts, but in the patterns of story, in the anomalies of stone, in the whispers of imagination. To think this way is both humbling and liberating. It humbles us because it strips away the illusion of being the first or the only. We are not Earth's chosen rulers, but participants in a drama much older than ourselves. It liberates us because it means intelligence is not fragile, not a fluke, but a recurring possibility. If it has risen before, it can rise again. Even if we fall, the song will continue. Imagine, then, that we are walking paths already walked, asking questions already asked, that the stars have been studied, the oceans crossed, the atoms split all long before us and long forgotten. Imagine that when we create myths of gods and kings, when we dream of Atlantis and Lemuria, when we carve dragons and serpents, we are not inventing from nothing, but remembering faintly what has been. If Earth was ruled before us, then the universe is not silent. It is speaking through time, reminding us that we are not alone in the story of intelligence. Others have ruled, others have dreamed, others have fallen. Their memory is not gone, it is buried, transformed, carried forward in subtle ways. This perspective also sharpens the fragility of our own moment. If civilizations have risen and fallen before, then so can ours. We are not immune to extinction, to cataclysm, to the erasure of time. Our skyscrapers and satellites may one day be as invisible as theirs, dissolved into stone and silence. We too may become myths, remembered only as strange echoes in the stories of those who come after. But perhaps that is the beauty of it. To know that we are part of a cycle is to see ourselves as participants in a grander story. A story not of singular triumph, but of continuity. A story in which intelligence is not the possession of one species, but the inheritance of Earth itself, expressed in many forms across the ages. If Earth was ruled before us, then humanity's place is not diminished but deepened. We are part of a tradition of wonder, a lineage of dreamers stretching across time. Our task is not to be the first or the last, but to add our verse to the song, to live, to create, to imagine, and to accept that one day our memory too may dissolve into myth, into stone, into possibility. Not proof, but possibility. Not certainty, but wonder. There is another possibility, one that does not rely on forgotten rulers, vanished civilizations, or erased intelligences. It is the possibility that Earth has always been ours, that humanity, for all its fragility, is unique, singular, and alone in the great span of deep time. If this is true, then the myths of gods and first rulers, of serpents and sky kings, are not memories of encounters, but expressions of imagination. They are allegories, not archives. They reflect not what was, but what we feared, longed for, and dreamed in the face of a universe too immense to comprehend. Deep time is unsettling. To stand before a cliff face layered with hundreds of millions of years is to feel a vertigo of perspective. Our lives, our empires, even our species shrink into near nothingness against that backdrop. And so perhaps we created stories to comfort ourselves, stories that place us within a pattern, that give shape to chaos. By imagining gods as rulers or civilizations lost to the sea, we soften the terror of impermanence. We give deep time a face, a voice, a meaning. Consider how myth often arises where the unknown presses closest. Storms become gods of thunder. The night sky becomes a map of heroes and monsters. Floods become tales of divine punishment or renewal. Myths are not records of events but responses to the overwhelming. They are the human mind reaching for narrative in a world that offers none. If Earth was always ours, then the serpent gods, the feathered kings, the bringers of fire and writing, are reflections of ourselves. They are the embodiment of our creativity, our fears, our desire to explain leaps in progress. When fire transformed our lives, it was easier to imagine it stolen from heaven than invented by trial and error. When writing reshaped memory, it felt too miraculous to be human alone, so we gave it to a god. When agriculture altered the world, we imagined it taught by divine hands. In this reading, the myths do not point outward to older intelligences but inward to our own psyche. They are mirrors, not windows. They show us how humans respond to mystery with story, with symbol, with awe. They reveal not what the earth remembers, but what we imagine when faced with the unknown. This interpretation is no less wondrous. It suggests that human imagination itself is the great inheritance, that our ability to weave myth, to conjure gods, to people the void with stories, is what makes us rulers not of earth in a literal sense, but of meaning. Where other creatures live in cycles of survival, we live in cycles of story. If earth was always ours, then the myths of first rulers are not borrowed memories but human inventions. They are our attempt to make sense of time too deep to bear. We invented predecessors because we feared insignificance. We peopled the past with kings and gods because emptiness was too heavy a weight. In that sense, lost rulers may not be real, but they are true. They are true to the human condition, true to the way we dream, true to the way we reach beyond ourselves. This view does not diminish myth, it honors it. It reminds us that even if we are alone, even if Earth has only ever carried one civilization, our imagination fills the silence. We are storytellers by nature, shaping chaos into order, absence into presence, void into narrative. So perhaps Earth was always ours. Perhaps we are the only rulers it has ever known. If so, then the myths are not echoes of others but echoes of ourselves, resonating across time. They are our fear of being small, our longing to belong, our attempt to anchor ourselves in the immensity of deep time. Not certainty, but wonder. Not proof, but possibility. To entertain these possibilities that Earth has hosted rulers before us, or that it has only ever been ours, is to step beyond science and myth into philosophy. What does it mean for us, as a species, to live within such uncertainty? What does it mean if we are only one among many, or if we are utterly alone? If civilizations have risen before, then humanity is humbled. We are not the crown of creation, but one iteration of a repeating experiment. Our greatness is not guaranteed, and our survival is not assured. History, in this view, is not a straight line but a series of waves. Civilizations swell, crest, and collapse, dissolving into silence before the cycle begins again. To imagine ourselves as part of this rhythm is to see our achievements not as unique but as echoes. We build pyramids, perhaps others did too. We map the stars, perhaps others looked upward before us. We split the atom, perhaps that too has been done in ages we cannot reach. If Earth was always ours, the implications are different but no less profound. Then humanity's uniqueness is both gift and burden. If no one came before us, then we carry the weight of being the first to dream, the first to wonder, the first to shape Earth into meaning. The myths are not inherited but self-made, monuments not to memory but to imagination. This perspective does not humble us, but it confronts us with responsibility. If we are the only intelligence Earth has ever birthed, then our extinction would silence not just a species but an entire experiment. The song of meaning would end with us. Both possibilities, many before us or only us, lead to the same reflection. Our place is fragile. We exist on a narrow ridge between past and future, carrying memory, creating meaning, and trying to anchor ourselves in a universe that offers no guarantees. Philosophy, then, becomes the bridge between myth and science. Myths tell us stories of gods and rulers. Science shows us fossils, isotopes, and erasures. Philosophy asks, what do these stories and silences mean for us now? Perhaps the meaning lies not in certainty but in perspective. To see ourselves as one of many is to embrace humility, to live with the knowledge that we are not unique but part of a cycle that dwarfs our pride. To see ourselves as the only is to embrace responsibility, to recognize the fragile uniqueness of consciousness and to guard it carefully. In both cases, the lesson may be the same: to live with care, to see civilization not as a permanent structure, but as a fragile flame carried forward through storms. To know that we, like those before or like those imagined, are temporary. And in that knowledge, to act with reverence, with creativity, with an awareness that our time is both fleeting and precious. Philosophy does not answer the question of whether others ruled before us, but it reframes the question itself. The value lies not in proof but in wonder, not in certainty but in reflection. To imagine forgotten rulers is to remind ourselves that we too may be forgotten. To imagine we are the only is to remind ourselves that forgetting would erase everything. Both views press us toward humility, gratitude, and care. Perhaps that is the ultimate implication, that the stories we tell about the past are not only about the past, they are about how we choose to live in the present and how we dream the future. Not certainty but wonder, not proof but possibility. Across the world's oldest stories, one theme emerges again and again. Death is not the end. In Egypt, the soul sails on in the solar bark. In Mesopotamia, it passes into shadowed lands beneath the earth. In Mesoamerica, it journeys through 9 layers of trial before reaching rest. In India, it returns in endless cycles of rebirth. Again and again, cultures speak not of vanishing, but of returning to a place beyond memory, a place that feels older than time itself. And so, perhaps the question is not only whether civilizations ruled before us, but whether each of us carries, within our own mortality, a thread leading back to the oldest civilization of all, the civilization of memory itself. When we die, do we vanish into silence, or do we rejoin the chorus, adding our voice to an eternal song already in progress? Imagine it, not darkness, not nothingness, but a threshold, gates opening in the vastness. Beyond them, not silence, but voices ancient, familiar, waiting. The voices of those who came before us, of those who ruled, who dreamed, who were forgotten, not lost, but gathered, not gone, but home.